Clear as day? Or not so much? I've been asked recently how I deal with clear cast resins. To my shame, the only answer I could give was that I prime over them. But what if the intention is that you want clear models for things like ghosts and gems? Is there a way to work with the clear cast to get some interesting effects? Well, I wouldn't be the paint man journeying if I didn't explore the unknown once in a while. So what's the plan? I have here 6 identical ghosts printed in a clear blue resin. It was a figure I found on My Mini Factory from creator Gloomy Kid, then remixed by Robin3Dverse, who made it able to print supportless, so there won't be any support blemishes to deal with. Then I also have a myriad of finishes, inks, and paints to try things with. So the first thing I want to try is just a normal shading, as if the clear base is the highlighted base coat. What if I just go in with some harmonious shades so that the deep recesses are opaque, but the normal faces are clear still? So I'll get out the phthalo blue and a diox purple, both nice and dark to start, but even still, I'm going to be adding some black primer, just so I know they'll stick to the untreated model. And the good news for this is that it can be done with a brush, while some of the future ones I'll be doing with an airbrush. I'll start by outlining the deepest recesses with the black and purple. The plan here is to keep these starting lines pretty thin, since they will be the darkest parts of the shading. I'll be going over the whole model with this as well, like I would a black lining on a normal model when I'm trying to make sure certain parts get separated out properly. I also need to go over the lines a few times since I can still see through it with only one pass. Once the purple is done with, the blue is going to be for a bit of feathering, which I'm not really too sure how that's going to work with the unpainted resin, but that's what I do if it was painted, so that's what I'm going to try. I'll basically wet my brush and make it damp, then just put the tip into the paint. Then on the model, start in the deepest part where I aligned with the purple and gradually pull out that blue paint, feathering it as I do. When that's done, we get this. The first thing I need to say is that lining a clear model is a trip. You almost need an opaque one as well, just as a reference, because it was really hard to make out what was what, and on what side of the model it was on. I almost had to use the feel of the brush as a guide rather than my eyes. As for the feathering, it made me really appreciate how transparent paint really is when thinned out. And on an opaque model it changes so much in the way of color, but this one, it made things a little darker, but it didn't change the opacity like I expected. So what do I think of the look? Well, I actually kind of like it, but it does have a bit of a cartoony style with the dark outlines, especially since you can still see through the model to the outlines on the other side. Method number 2 I want to try because of something I noticed in these plastic rings I got for one of my Halloween games. The plastic is just a clear plastic, but the setting it's placed in actually gets the same silver paint as the rest of it does. But because of that, the gem actually looks a little more real because those reflections are bouncing around. So to try that with the little ghost here, I'm going to give him a purple backing, but cover that up with some black so the purple can only be seen by looking through the clear plastic itself. I'll use some gray primer in this one, since I feel like brighter might be a bit better since the clear blue resin still has a little bit of fog through it. A lighter color might be more visible. I'm going to keep this one simple and just run the purple through my airbrush, only covering the back of the ghost since that'll be the least interesting side of it. I'll do a couple coats of it just to make sure that the purple layer is fully opaque, since now I'm going to cover it with the black primer. This should cover up the light purple so that from the outside all we see is the black, but if this works, how I hope, we should still see the purple reflected from inside the ghost. Just to be a little more thorough for myself, I did highlight the black a bit so that it looks like it's phasing from incorporeal to solid. As far as the method goes though, it darkened the whole model, which I guess should have been expected, but I see all sorts of purple tints in the folds of the clear blue now, which is what I was hoping for. So I really like how this turned out, and maybe with a bit lighter paint, it'll not appear too dark either. This is the one I see quite commonly around the YouTubes, and that's alcohol ink washes over clear resin. I, however, do not have any alcohol-based ink. So I want to see how well acrylic ink does, since a lot of us will already have that since it's a useful tool for normal painting, which I should eventually do a video on, but I digress. This will be the brush version of an ink wash, which makes it pretty easy to do. Just load the brush up with some ink and slap her on, though I mixed in some satin varnish to hopefully give it some hold to the body of the untreated resin. I'll do it in 2 colors, blue and purple, and see if I can be a fancy lad about it and make a gradient between the two on the model itself. Just hitting the top of it with the purple and the bottom with the blue, then taking a damp brush to blend the 2 halves together at the middle. Then we just wait for it to dry to get the results. And this is what it looks like, which I think worked quite well. It really heavily stained the model, which made it darker but still transparent, and like a wash, became a bit more opaque in the deep recesses. So there is some of that effect I was looking for from the first method I did with the paint. I'm not too sure how this would differ from an alcohol ink, but I do feel the satin medium also had a part to play in making this work right. For this one, it's going to be mostly the same as the last one. Same inks and even the same satin medium, but the idea is that by using my airbrush, I can get them to act more like a stain than a wash, and just change the outer color without losing any of the transparency. I'll start with the purple at the bottom first, just loading the ink and medium into the airbrush and starting with a very, very light layer on it on the lower half of the ghost. The goal is to get the color and keep the transparency. So to make a comparison, I'll only do 1 layer on the front and a second layer on the back once the first one dried, so we can see the effect with multiple coats and how it affects the finished product. While I've got the blue and the top half left to go, I want to try something dumb. Yeah, let's say dumb. Since I do have some isopropyl alcohol, what does mixing it in with the inks do? Since these are acrylic based, I assume it's going to act really weird, but let's put it on the model anyway. Surprisingly, it doesn't feel too much different than just the normal ink, though when it dries, it might tell a different story. So the purple did exactly what I thought it would, evenly cover the model to change its hue, though it doesn't take much to do that, and on the back you can see it covers much deeper. For the blue, I think the big difference between the IPA and satin mediums is the IPA made it spread out more and act more like the airbrush purple than just the wash, so there's not too much pooling in the recesses. Last test I want to do is see how varnishes might affect the clearness of the resin. Does gloss give it a nice shellac? Does matte make it really cloudy? Only one way to find out. I'm going to split a ghost in half for this experiment. Not physically, but instead of the line being imaginary, I am going to use some primer to paint a nice line down the middle of it, so angles aren't going to play tricks with our minds when we start to analyze. For the gloss coat, I'm not a huge fan of gloss varnish in miniature painting on anything except gems, so all I have is this small bottle of gloss medium from Vallejo. I was thinking about applying them by airbrush, but when I reflected on that idea, I figured doing it by brush might give more interesting results. Plus I won't have to mask anything. So this just gets applied unthinned on its half of the ghost. And its contender will be an ultra matte varnish, which is going to be Max Matte from Green Stuff World. It's a recent acquisition for me when I went on a hunt for really matte varnishes to use with Liquitex, since I'm not a fan of the satin finishes when trying to get paint on the model. This stuff is exactly what I want it to be. Thin, clear, and super matte. So it goes on right from the bottle to the brush and onto its half of the ghost. The most surprising thing about this part of the experiment is that nothing ended up being surprising. What I thought would happen is exactly what did happen. The glossy side ended up feeling a little more see-through because of the focusing lens-like effect of the gloss coat, while the matte side got more foggy or frosty, which is also what I expected to happen. So now that I've learned a bunch about inks and finishes, what would the ultimate clear cast ghost look like? Well, 3 of the techniques impressed me the most. The color backing, the gloss varnish, and the sprayed ink just to change color in places. So I'm going to go with a combination of those 3. Starting with the gloss varnish. My reasoning for the gloss varnish on the front will be so that when I do the color backing, the color should be more visible through the clearer surface of the glossy front. I'll be a little lazy with it this time though, and just apply it with my airbrush. Next, I'm going to do my backing, but I think I'll do this one with a bit more process behind it. It was a little dark when I did the test, so I'll make the first layer a light yellow and have it sit in the crevices of some of the cloth folds. My hope is to make it shine a little from the inside. Then I'll go over with the light purple, just like I did before with the airbrush, but making the purple a bit lighter, with a bit of white in the gray primer, with the purple. Last will just be the black primer again to cover it all up, and give me a base to start from when doing the normal painting. Once all that shading, highlighting, and lining thing was done, the last thing will be to give his lower half a bit of a hue shift. Though instead of the purple I have been using, I'll do it with a bit of yellow. Over the clear blue resin, it should come out with a slight green tint, but all I'm really looking for is to give the clear parts a bit of a difference so it's not one solid block of color. And so here we are, all the experimenting bundled into one model. I think one of my limiting factors was actually printing the models in a clear blue resin. I even cut it with some clear resin, but still, once covered a bit, it went really dark. So keeping it clear I feel would have allowed me to control the color a little bit better. And while I didn't try it this time, it would also be interesting to see what a metallic backing might do with the clear resin like those rings. Everything I did with the airbrush I think is completely possible with the brush as well. Just make sure to keep layers thin and smooth and let them build up gradually. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this one, or just other fun things to do with painting miniatures. And until next time, enjoy your own painting journey.